What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
I can still picture that rainy afternoon in our cramped kitchen in Columbus when my parents, Robert and Linda Harper, sat me down with their matching mugs of lukewarm coffee and delivered the crushing news that they simply could not muster the $85,000 needed for my 8-year-old son Jack's life-saving open-heart surgery, explaining in hushed tones how every last cent was locked away in their retirement accounts and the endless payments on that sprawling colonial house they'd bought as their dream retirement spot in the suburbs of Cleveland, even though Jack's congenital heart defect had him collapsing after the simplest games in the backyard, his tiny chest heaving with effort that no child should ever have to endure, and I, already battered from a messy divorce from my ex-husband Tom just 2 years earlier, was juggling double shifts as a billing clerk at the local hospital while scraping by in our one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of takeout and desperation. They enveloped me in one of those obligatory family hugs that felt more like a formality than genuine comfort, murmuring assurances about sending thoughts and prayers along with perhaps a few home-cooked meals to tide us over. But deep down I knew those gestures wouldn't bridge the gap between life and the operating table, so I swallowed my sobs and launched into a frantic campaign of my own, calling in favors from coworkers who'd become like surrogate aunts and uncles, maxing out credit cards until the interest rates loomed like storm clouds, and even staging impromptu yard sales on weekends where I'd part with cherished keepsakes from my own childhood just to watch the dollars trickle in toward the insurmountable sum. 3 months dragged by in a blur of doctor's appointments and insurance appeals that yielded only partial coverage promises, leaving me to wonder how a family that preached togetherness could draw such a hard line when my boy's future hung in the balance. Until one crisp autumn morning an ornate wedding invitation arrived in the mailbox, embossed with gold lettering announcing my younger sister Sarah's nuptials to her longtime beau Mike in a lavish ceremony at an exclusive vineyard in Napa Valley. Complete with 500 guests flown in from across the country, a custom-designed gown that must have cost a small fortune from some high-end atelier in New York, a string quartet imported straight from the city lights, and a grand finale of fireworks that painted the California sky in bursts of color. The entire affair tallying up to a staggering $230,000, as I later pieced together from the flood of social media posts and cousinly gossip that painted it as the event of the decade. Staring at those filtered photos on my cracked phone screen during a rare break at work, I felt a wave of nausea rise as I mentally subtracted the surgery cost from the wedding budget and realized it would have covered Jack's procedure 3 times over without touching the principal, prompting me to dial my mother's number that very evening, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands as I confronted her about the glaring hypocrisy, only for her to counter with a defensive ramble about how Sarah had dreamed of this day since girlhood and how certain milestones in life demanded celebration to keep the family spirit alive, as if the flutter of a veil and the clink of champagne flutes held more weight than the steady rhythm of a grandson's repaired heart. That conversation left me reeling in the dim light of my living room, the betrayal settling like lead in my gut while I forced myself to focus on the practical next steps for Jack, who looked up at me with those trusting blue eyes and asked if Grandma and Grandpa were coming to help, forcing me to craft a vague reassurance about busy schedules that hid the ugly truth of priorities skewed beyond recognition. In the weeks that followed, I rallied the community in ways that still amaze me, organizing a fundraiser at the neighborhood VFW post where strangers who'd never met us before emptied their pockets and shared stories of their own medical battles over folding tables laden with donated pies and casseroles. The outpouring of support culminating in enough funds to secure the surgery date just as winter's chill began to bite, and Jack emerged from the operating room with a faint pink scar across his chest that we turned into a story of bravery during bedtime tales, his recovery a testament to the makeshift family I'd assembled from the fringes of my life. Yet, even as we celebrated his first post-op soccer practice with ice cream cones under the spring sun, the shadow of that wedding lingered like an uninvited guest, gnawing at the edges of my hard-won peace until one fateful evening. While rummaging through a stack of neglected bills in the hallway closet, I unearthed a forgotten wedding planner's invoice slipped between junk mail envelopes. Its Itemized lines revealing exorbitant fees for private jets to shuttle VIPs and rare orchids imported from halfway around the world, figures that shattered the narrative of fiscal restraint my parents had clung to. And as I traced the numbers with a trembling finger under the harsh bulb overhead, my doorbell rang unexpectedly, revealing a courier with a package addressed in Sarah's elegant script, its contents promising revelations that could unravel everything I'd tried to bury. That package from Sarah sat unopened on my kitchen counter for 2 full days like a ticking bomb wrapped in festive paper, its presence a constant reminder of the tangled web our family had spun long before Jack's heart issues thrust us into the spotlight of neglect. And when I finally tore into it one evening after tucking Jack into bed with a story about resilient explorers conquering impossible odds, I found inside not just a belated birthday card for him, but a stack of glossy photos from the wedding that seemed to mock me with their perfection, each one capturing Sarah radiant in her gown amid cascades of white roses and laughter that echoed the joy they'd poured money into while my pleas echoed unanswered in empty bank accounts. The accompanying note in her looping handwriting begged for reconciliation, claiming life had humbled her after the initial bliss of marriage faded into routine squabbles with Mike over finances strained by the very extravagance that had defined their start, and she hinted at Mom and Dad's growing isolation as they navigated retirement with fewer friends than expected, suggesting perhaps it was time to let bygones dissolve like sugar in hot tea. But reading those words only ignited a fresh resolve in me to sever the ties that had already frayed my spirit, so I composed a brief email the next morning before work, outlining my decision to go no contact indefinitely because trust, once shattered like fine china under a careless foot, couldn't be glued back without visible cracks that would always catch the light. With that boundary firmly in place, I threw myself into nurturing Jack's recovery with the ferocity of a lioness guarding her cub, coordinating physical therapy sessions that transformed his tentative steps into confident sprints across the soccer field, where he now chased the ball with a vigor that made the other parents cheer and me swell with a pride mixed with quiet relief, all while advancing my career through late-night online courses in healthcare administration that positioned me for a promotion to shift lead. The extra income allowing us to upgrade to a cozy 2-bedroom house on a tree-lined street where neighbors waved hello and barbecues became weekend rituals that filled the voids left by absent grandparents. Those early years of independence brought moments of levity amid the grind, like that disastrous family reunion in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, where my Aunt Rita, ever the busybody with a voice like a foghorn, cornered me near the dessert table and launched into a tirade about how I was being unreasonably stubborn by shunning Mom and Dad. Her cheeks flushed from the punch bowl as she waved a plastic fork for emphasis and declared that blood was thicker than any watery excuse for a surgery bill, prompting me to stifle a chuckle that bordered on the absurd because in that instant, picturing her dramatic flair as a sideshow act in the circus of our relatives, I realized how their meddling came off like a poorly scripted soap opera, where everyone played the victim except the one actually holding the pieces together. I navigated those encounters with polite deflections, steering conversations toward Jack's academic triumphs or my latest volunteer shift at the Children's Hospital. But the humor faded into a more somber resolve as Jack turned 12 and began probing deeper into why his grandparents had vanished from holiday cards and birthday calls, his innocent questions forcing me to weigh the pain of partial truths against the shelter of silence, a choice that weighed heavy because while it protected him from their hypocrisy, it also robbed him of potential connections that might have softened with time, leaving me to question in quiet moments if my no-contact fortress was truly a sanctuary or just another form of isolation dressed in self-righteousness. For years slipped by in that delicate balance, marked by Jack's growth into a thoughtful teen who aced math competitions and dreamed of building bridges that connected worlds, until Sarah shattered the peace once more by appearing on my doorstep during a relentless downpour, her umbrella dripping puddles as she stood there in a raincoat that screamed city sophistication, eyes puffy from what she claimed were sleepless nights over her crumbling marriage and a sudden need for sisterly wisdom from the one who'd always landed on her feet. We retreated to the living room where steam rose from mugs of herbal tea, and as she unraveled her tale of Mike's wandering eye and the debt collectors circling like vultures over their shared credit cards, she wove in subtle pleas for me to reconsider the family rift, mentioning offhand how Dad had confided in her about a long-suppressed guilt tied to decisions made in the shadow of Grandma's passing, but I held my ground with a calm that masked the storm inside, redirecting to neutral ground. About Jack's upcoming science fair while inwardly seething at her selective amnesia regarding the wedding's role in our divide. As she departed with promises of lighter check-ins and a hug that lingered too long, Jack emerged from his room with a curious tilt to his head, asking why Aunt Sarah looked so sad and if it had anything to do with the old photos she'd glimpsed on the coffee table, prompting me to improvise a tale of adult growing pains that left a bitter taste. And later that night, while sifting through a dusty trunk of family heirlooms in the garage to distract from the intrusion, I pulled out a brittle envelope sealed with faded wax, its contents a letter from my parents to Sarah dated just after Jack's diagnosis, outlining their rationale for funneling emergency funds toward her upcoming vows because, as they wrote, securing her future would honor the family's legacy in ways a medical uncertainty could not, the words blurring through my rising tears as the phone vibrated with a new voicemail from an unknown number, Sarah's voice trembling on the line with an urgent whisper that Dad had finally spilled a secret from our childhood that changed everything. That voicemail from Sarah lingered in my inbox like an unwelcome guest who overstayed their welcome at a party long gone, her whispered urgency about Dad's childhood confession pulling at threads I wasn't ready to unravel. So I deleted it without a second listen and redoubled my efforts to fortify the life Jack and I had carved out amid the rubble of family fallout, watching as the seasons blurred into a steady cadence of milestones that marked our independence. From Jack's middle school graduation, where he accepted an award for excellence in science, with a speech that brought tears to my eyes and applause from teachers who'd become allies in his journey, to my own ascent in the hospital hierarchy, where relentless dedication earned me the role of department supervisor, overseeing budgets and teams that ironically helped other families navigate the very financial mazes I'd once crawled through alone. The irony not lost on me as I approved coverage extensions that might have eased our crisis if only the system had bent for us back then. Those years wove a tapestry of quiet triumphs that dulled the sharp edges of resentment, allowing me to channel lingering bitterness into subtle acts of retribution that satisfied without scorching the earth. Like the afternoon I spent meticulously compiling public records and vendor quotes from the wedding into an anonymous email sent to a gossip columnist at a regional lifestyle magazine known for skewering lavish affairs among the Midwest elite, detailing the $230,000 spectacle with just enough verifiable specifics to spark an exposé without tracing back to me, and sure enough, weeks later the article hit online with snarky headlines about vow renewal or vow robbery. Complete with blurred photos that I recognized instantly, the comments section erupting in a mix of outrage and schadenfreude that had me chuckling over my morning coffee as I imagined my parents' faces flushing crimson while scrolling through judgments from strangers who unknowingly avenged my son's sideline surgery. It was a petty thrill, that slow-motion dance of karma twirling into view like an uninvited waltz partner at a wedding reception gone awry. And in my private moments of reflection during commutes along the interstate with the radio humming old country tunes about lost love and hard lessons, I'd quip to myself in a voice laced with wry amusement that their champagne dreams had finally popped with a fizzy backlash, a light vulgarity in the mental image of their prized crystal toasting glasses clinking against the hard reality of public scrutiny, though that same humor masked a deeper unease, because as the piece circulated among extended family chats, whispers reached me through the grapevine about how Sarah had confronted our parents in a tearful standoff, accusing them of hypocrisy that now stained her own post-divorce narrative, forcing me to confront whether my anonymous nudge was empowering justice or just escalating a cycle of hurt that viewers might decry as too vengeful for a mother who'd already won the real prize in Jack's vibrant health. Life pressed forward regardless, with Jack diving into high school electives that fueled his passion for engineering and robotics, building contraptions in our garage that whirred to life under strings of holiday lights. While I cultivated a circle of friends through book clubs and volunteer drives at the local food bank, women my age sharing stories of divorce and reinvention over glasses of wine that loosened tongues without loosening resolve. Their support a balm that made the no-contact policy feel less like a sentence and more like a strategic retreat. Yet, even in those wins, dilemmas crept in like fog off Lake Erie, particularly when Jack's annual cardiology follow-up revealed a minor irregularity in his heart rhythm that required closer monitoring and lifestyle tweaks. The news hitting me like an echo of past terrors and amplifying my protectiveness to the point where I'd hover during his practices, a habit that drew gentle ribbing from his coach about overbearing moms. Though inwardly it reignited questions about whether shielding him from the grandparents' legacy meant denying him a fuller picture or preserving the purity of our bond. A choice that stirred discomfort because forgiveness preached in church bulletins and therapy sessions seemed noble until you lived the betrayal firsthand. The growing conflict simmered beneath the surface until one crisp fall evening, as leaves skittered across our driveway like scattered secrets, my phone buzzed with a call from Mrs. Delaney, the silver-haired widow from our old neighborhood church who'd always doted on Sarah during youth group outings and now served as an unwitting bridge for my parents' overtures. Her voice warm but tentative as she relayed how Robert and Linda had pulled her aside after Sunday service to inquire about our well-being, dropping hints of remorse tied to that very childhood secret Sarah had alluded to, suggesting they yearned to make amends now that empty nest syndrome had amplified their regrets and a recent health scare for Dad had prompted soul-searching talks over family dinners that tasted of unspoken apologies. I thanked her with measured politeness, my grip tightening on the steering wheel as I ended the call from the parking lot after Jack's robotics club, the indirect intrusion stirring old wounds like salt in a fresh cut and leaving me to pace the kitchen that night, debating whether to reinforce the walls or peek through a crack, especially when an unmarked envelope arrived the next day in the mail slot, its contents a faded snapshot of the four of us from a long-ago beach vacation, scrawled on the reverse in Mom's familiar cursive, a single line pleading for a conversation that might heal what time had only hardened. That unmarked envelope with the faded beach snapshot arrived like a whisper from a past I'd carefully archived in the recesses of my mind, its image of us four, me as a gangly teen with braces and Sarah as the favored toddler on Dad's shoulders, evoking a flood of memories from sunnier days in the dunes of Lake Michigan where laughter drowned out the undercurrents of favoritism that would later define our divides, and on the back in Mom's looping script, the plea for a simple conversation to mend. Fences carried a weight that pressed against my resolve, making me fold it away in a drawer rather than burn it outright, because even after all the quiet wins, a sliver of curiosity lingered about what truths might surface if I cracked the door just enough to listen without inviting them in. As those indirect overtures from my parents intensified through Mrs. Delaney's weekly check-ins that blended church gossip with their latest regrets, painting pictures of Robert's prostate scare that had him contemplating mortality over late-night scotch, and Linda's insomnia fueled by what-ifs about Jack's early years, I felt the shadows of impending confrontation lengthen across our otherwise stable routine, prompting me to enact another layer of witty retribution by logging into an online donation portal one sleepless night and pledging a generous $5,000 to the American Heart Association's pediatric program in my parents' names, complete with a personalized certificate mailed to their new downsized condo in Florida, where they'd fled the Ohio winters. The gesture a clever irony that highlighted their past oversight while publicly framing them as belated philanthropists whose generosity now supported the surgeries they once deemed unaffordable. And I could almost hear the awkward phone calls they'd make to thank the organization, their voices strained with the unspoken knowledge that this spotlight came courtesy of the daughter they'd sidelined, a revenge so subtle it bordered on elegant mischief that had me smirking over breakfast as Jack puzzled over my sudden good mood. Yet that satisfaction mingled with a growing unease, because Jack, now 15 and navigating the hormonal tempests of high school with his first awkward crush on a classmate from debate club, began pressing for more details about his family tree during our ritual Sunday drives to the farmer's market, his questions evolving from casual curiosities to pointed inquiries about why Grandma and Aunt Sarah's holiday cards stopped coming years ago, forcing me to navigate the minefield of half-truths. That preserved his innocence at the cost of authenticity, a dilemma that gnawed because while viewers might applaud my protective instincts, they could just as easily fault me for weaving a narrative of abandonment that painted his grandparents as villains without giving them a chance to evolve, especially as my own therapy sessions unearthed how my choices echoed the very emotional withholding I'd resented in them. The uncertainty thickened like humidity before a thunderstorm when Jack's latest cardiology appointment brought a twist that yanked me back to those desperate hospital vigils, the specialist noting an unexpected flutter in his valve rhythm during a stress test that warranted immediate outpatient monitoring and a trial of beta blockers to stabilize it. The diagnosis not dire but enough to evoke flashbacks of beeping monitors and my solitary waits in sterile hallways, amplifying my vigilance too. The point where I'd double-check his symptoms after soccer scrimmages and snap at telemarketers who interrupted our quiet evenings, the stress manifesting in tension headaches that blurred the line between past trauma and present precaution. Sarah compounded the chaos with an unannounced video call during one of those fraught weeks, her face gaunt on the screen from what she described as the fallout of her divorce settlement that left her scraping by in a studio apartment back in Cleveland, and as she delved into admissions about how the wedding's glamour had masked deeper family dysfunctions like Dad's unresolved grief over Grandma's death leading to overcompensation for her milestones, she revealed a bombshell from an old journal she'd found in the attic. Our parents had received a modest inheritance from a distant uncle shortly before Jack's diagnosis, earmarked vaguely for family needs, but they'd redirected it toward securing the vineyard venue. As a symbol of stability amid their own marital strains, a confession that twisted the knife because it humanized their selfishness while underscoring the deliberate choice against us, leaving me to end the call with a noncommittal nod that hid my churning turmoil over whether this partial absolution demanded my forgiveness or just more boundaries. In the days that followed, the air in our home hummed with unspoken anticipation, Jack's light-hearted complaints about the new meds mixing with my internal debates on confronting the envelope's plea, until a peculiar email from the estate lawyer handling Grandma's lingering affairs pinged my inbox late one evening, attaching scanned documents showing that the $10,000 medical fund check from years back had indeed been cashed by my parents, but rerouted through a wedding expense account rather than dispersed to me. The bureaucratic oversight now corrected with interest that could fund Jack's college applications, a revelation. That hit during a power outage when candles flickered shadows on the walls like omens of reckoning. I sat there in the dim glow, the laptop screen casting blue light on my face as rain pattered against the windows, weighing the legal pursuit against the emotional toll it might exact on our fragile peace. The conflict building to a fever pitch that made every creak in the house sound like footsteps approaching, until finally, as thunder rolled in the distance and Jack called from upstairs about a nightmare involving locked doors, the doorbell pierced the night with insistent chimes, drawing me to the peephole where I saw my parents huddled on the porch under a shared umbrella, their faces etched with exhaustion and resolve. Dad holding that same manila envelope from the lawyer's mention and Mom's lips moving in a silent prayer, their uninvited presence demanding a response that hung suspended in the charged air as I hesitated with my hand on the lock, heart racing with the precipice of what words they might unleash after a decade of distance. With my hand frozen on the doorknob as thunder grumbled like an old grudge in the distance, I finally swung the door open just wide enough to let the porch light spill onto my parents' weathered faces. Robert and Linda standing there drenched from the downpour despite their flimsy umbrella, their eyes wide with a mix of hope and trepidation that mirrored the stormy night, and as they stepped forward almost in unison, Dad extending the manila envelope like an olive branch wrapped in legal jargon, while Mom's voice cracked with the weight of unshed tears, They poured out an apology that had clearly been rehearsed in countless empty evenings down in their Florida condo, admitting how the decision to funnel that inheritance from the distant uncle and grandma's medical fund into Sarah's wedding had been a colossal misstep born from their fear of financial ruin and a misguided belief that one daughter's fairy tale start would somehow ripple positivity to the whole family, ignoring the immediate crisis of Jack's failing heart because, as Dad stammered with hands trembling from age and nerves, they thought insurance loopholes and time would resolve it without their intervention. A rationale that now rang hollow in the wake of his own health battles and Sarah's shattered marriage that left her couch surfing between friends after Mike walked out citing the debt as a suffocating noose around their dreams. Mom elaborated through sobs that therapy sessions in their golden years had unearthed the favoritism's roots in their own upbringing, where Sarah's birth had come after a string of miscarriages, making her the fragile miracle they overprotected at the expense of fairness, and how Jack's surgery denial haunted their nights like a ghost refusing to fade, prompting this cross-country drive fueled by a lawyer's nudge about the corrected bequest now swollen with interest to $25,000, enough not just for any medical follow-ups, but perhaps a gesture toward the college fund Jack deserved, their pleas laced with promises of family counseling and gradual re-entry into our lives if only I'd grant them a glimpse of the grandson they'd missed watching grow from fragile boy to strapping teen with a knack for circuits and codes. Listening to this torrent of confessions under the relentless patter of rain on the awning, I felt the conflict roil inside like a pot about to boil over, the audience of my own conscience urging a bridge of forgiveness, because weren't they human? Flawed in ways that time and loss had amplified into genuine remorse, yet the years of solitary fundraisers and deflected questions from Jack clashed against that mercy, making me question if opening the door further would invite healing or just recycle the hurt under a veneer of amends, a dilemma sharpened by the humor in Dad's fumbling grip on the envelope that nearly slipped into a puddle, evoking a mental quip about their grand gestures always teetering on the edge of slapstick disaster, like a bad rom-com climax where the rain-soaked reunion fizzles into awkward silence. Sarah's recent emails had hinted at her own unraveling, confessing over late-night calls how the wedding's excess had set impossible standards that poisoned her union from the vows onward. And now with her adrift and our parents humbled by shrinking retirement funds after bad stock picks tied to wedding vendor fallout, the family tableau looked less like villains and more like cautionary tales of misplaced priorities, twisting my resolve because while part of me ached for Jack to know these grandparents who might have learned their lessons, another part recoiled at the risk of reintroducing instability into the sanctuary we'd built, a choice that might strike viewers as unforgivingly rigid when vulnerability demanded compassion. Especially as Mom reached out a hand glistening with rain and regret, whispering about seeing Jack just once to share stories of his great-grandma's resilience that echoed his own. In that suspended moment, with lightning flickering like judgment across the sky and Jack's voice calling faintly from upstairs about the storm keeping him awake, I mustered a smile that curved my lips without reaching my eyes. A deliberate mask of composure that held back the flood of words they craved, saying absolutely nothing as the silence stretched taut between us, their expectant faces searching mine for cracks in the armor I'd forged from betrayal's forge, and then, with a measured gentleness that belied the storm within, I eased the door shut, the latch clicking like a period at the end of a long overdue sentence, leaving them on the step with their envelope and unanswered hopes while I leaned against the wood, breath steadying as the rain amplified their retreating footsteps into the night. Upstairs, I soothed Jack back to sleep with tales of storms passing into clear skies, but as dawn crept in with birdsong mocking the drama, the ambiguity settled over me like morning mist, the unopened envelope still wedged in the doorframe where it had fallen. A tangible question mark prompting endless what-ifs about whether my silent close was the ultimate revenge in denying them absolution on my terms or a mischance at mending that might have enriched Jack's world without erasing the scars, leaving the truth of forgiveness dangling just out of reach, a thought-provoking void where closure hovered eternally unresolved.